300-year-old elders. Who are they? Legend or truth? Why did Peter I issue a bloody decree on their extermination? And where did the real Peter Y go? The answers to these questions will shake you to the core. Join our investigation, and together we will reveal the secrets that were hidden from us. Many historians dispute the official version of Peter I's biography. Dmitry Merezhkovsky in Antichrist describes the dramatic changes in the appearance and psyche of the Tsar after his return from Europe. He stayed there for 2 years instead of the planned 2 weeks. The embassy, initially consisting of 20 Russians headed by Menshikov, upon its return consisted of Dutchmen, with the exception of Menshikov. The returning Tsar spoke Russian with difficulty and did not recognize his relatives. This provoked a Streltsy rebellion led by Princess Sophia, Peter's sister. The rebellion was brutally suppressed. Sophia was executed. Peter's wife was exiled but never reached her destination. The Tsar summoned another wife from Holland, Peter's brother, Ivan V, and his children died. Alexei, Peter's son, was executed for trying to free his father. These events cast doubt on the generally accepted biography. So, what did this false Peter do? He began to act like a real invader. First, he destroyed our local government, the Zemstvo, and replaced it with foreign bureaucrats who brought with them corruption, debauchery, and drunkenness. And they also vigorously imposed all this here. Second, he gave the peasants into the possession of landowners, making them, in fact, slaves. And to whiten his image, this reform is attributed to Ivan the Terrible. Can you imagine? Third, he destroyed the merchant class and instead began to support industrialists, and this destroyed the universality of our people. Fourthly, he destroyed the clergy, the guardians of our culture, and began to replace orthodoxy with Catholicism, which led to atheism. Plus, he introduced smoking, alcohol, and coffee, and destroyed our ancient calendar, rewinding our history 5,503 years back. And all our chronicles were collected in St. Petersburg and burned, like Philaret. And instead, they hired German professors to write us a completely different history. And also, under the guise of fighting the old faith, he destroyed all the elders who lived for more than 300 years and forbade the cultivation of amaranth and the eating of amaranth bread, which was our main food and helped us live long. He abolished our measures of length, the fathom, finger, elbow, vershok, which were used in clothing and architecture, and made them fixed according to the Western model. And this destroyed ancient Russian architecture and art, and people stopped being beautiful because their proportions were broken. And in addition, he replaced our title system with a European one, and the peasants turned from titled people into an estate, although peasant was a title higher than the king. He destroyed our 151-character written language and introduced the 43-character written language of Cyril and Methodius, disarmed our army, exterminating the Streltsy, and introduced European weapons and uniforms, because of which the new regiments began to be called amusing. What a reformer he was. And in the archive of the Russian National Library in the manuscript department, there is still a royal decree of Peter the Great on the destruction of 300-year-old elders. For a long time, historians could not understand why. Finally, the answer was found. It is known that most of the elders who have crossed the 100-year mark live on the Japanese island of Okinawa. But few people know that 120 years ago in the Pskov province, there were hundreds of times more such people than on the Japanese island. In one of the old books of 1788, information was published about people who lived more than 100 years. It turned out that such long livers were in every village, and they did not resemble today's old people, but were full of strength and energy. For example, in the estate of Count Vorontsov, a midwife at the age of 105 delivered a child. Not far from Taganrog, a 116-year-old man and his 104-year-old wife worked around the house and in the fields. In 1948, during the USSR census, long livers of 134 and 146 years were discovered. One of them lived to 168 years and the other to 152 years. According to an old census, the granddaughter of Alexander Suvorov lived to 146 years. She was arrested at 108 years old on a false denunciation and released at 132 years. It is interesting that, for unknown reasons, many plaques on the graves of those who lived more than 120 years were changed, reducing the age of the long livers. In China, there were cases when they congratulated on the 200th anniversary. However, there are suggestions that not all such cases were included in the documents. According to some teachings, a person needs 144 years to fully prepare for the transition to another world. However, for some, this time was not enough, so 300-year-old elders appeared in Russes. Even today, in times of harmful factors, each person has the resources to live much longer than the usual maximum. Chinese doctor Li Qingyun, who lived more than 250 years. But how did people manage to live so long? After all, times, frankly, were not easy. No special secret, only proper nutrition, good ecology, complete self-control, and lack of stress. In addition, old people, having exchanged the second hundred, were almost impossible to meet in large villages and cities. They lived far from the bustle of everyday life, on the outskirts or in a dense forest, and only occasionally, out of extreme necessity, went out, so to speak, to people. And you know what else is surprising? Why did they need to go anywhere at all if they had everything for a full life at hand? Every day they ate mainly vegetables, berries, and cereals. They treated illnesses with herbs and chose solitude over noisy companies. That's all. These are the simple rules by which they ensured a long, happy, and peaceful life. Well, and about the fact that it was long. That's putting it mildly. And, it would seem, who could be bothered by peaceful and absolutely harmless elders living in the forest and eating leaves and roots? Historians are inclined to believe that the main reason for issuing such a decree was banal fear. The Tsar was afraid that 300-year-old elders, who had lived long before the beginning of his reign, had known better times. They could compare events happening now with those that happened earlier, express their opinions about the policies of the current ruler, and share with contemporaries their opinions on why people began to live worse. The elders were eyewitnesses to many key events. For this reason, they had the opportunity to tell descendants a real and sometimes very unflattering story that did not correspond to the goals and aspirations of the emperor. Peter did not need the people to know the truth. According to some sources, by signing the decree on the destruction of 300-year-old elders, the Tsar was introducing the so-called deceptive history. Simply put, the following generations were informed about the policies of his reign and all the laws adopted not as they really were, but in a light favorable to the authorities, which, in general, was not surprising. Any ruler, and Peter I especially, is not alien to vanity. The only sad thing is that in order to achieve such goals, it was necessary to destroy 300-year-old elders, long-livers, living bearers of the glorious and true history of Rus. Conclusion. Historians also agree that such long-livers were a pain in the neck for the emperor, unnecessary and even dangerous, since they could carry information forgotten by many, as well as the traditions of the people. Their inner sense of justice was above the laws. After a 2-year journey through Europe, the Tsar began to build a new empire, and people who remembered the old times and the old culture were a great hindrance to him. The long-lived elders were the keepers of history, witnesses of many significant events. A number of knowledge were passed on by word of mouth, and not on paper. Peter broke this chain, destroying people who had seen more than he had. That is how Peter the Phi destroyed these people, breaking the connection with the past.